Ever wonder what it's like behind the scenes at the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame? Well, sit back as Hall of Famers Big Daddy Don Garlits and Ted Jones take you behind the ropes for an exclusive look.
Welcome, drag race fans, to another edition of Inside Drag Racing, and welcome once again every year as we come to the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing, located just south of Ocala, Florida. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ted Jones, and we want to talk a little bit about this car. This is Swamp Rat number 1. It really made history for Big Daddy Don Garlits. It's just inside. It's the first car you'll see when you come to the museum. But instead of taking you a tour of the museum and showing you some of the displays we normally do here every year on Inside Drag Racing, we've decided to take you behind the scenes. That is the garage where a lot of these cars are restored, and some of them are being restored. In addition, later in the show, we'll introduce you to a place called the Museum Annex that's only available by special reservation in groups for an additional charge. But first, let's join Big Daddy, who's out there in the garage. He's actually recreating Swamp Rat number 1.
When you come in the main entrance of the museum into the drag racing room, immediately to your right is Swamp Rat 1, the original car, never out of my possession, and restored back to the way it looked on December the 8th, 1958, when it went 180 miles an hour for a new world record. But this is the way it looked on November the 10th, 1957, when it broke through the magical 170 mile per hour run of 176.4, and that was featured in Custom Rodder. The St. Pete Times came to my shop on Nebraska Avenue and took pictures for Custom Rodder and a nice color picture of the car the way it looked that day. We found this really nice set of 31 Chevy frame rails right here in Ocala, and we decided to recreate the car the way it looked on that historic day when that shot was heard around the world. These engineers at all the big universities had predicted that no one would ever exceed 169 in the quarter mile. Well, we know that's not true today, but back then when we went to 176, they were kind of concerned that it might not be real times. But this car had something else about it that was really special. It had a full floater rear, which meant that if you broke an axle, the wheel didn't come off. And one of my gurus in stock car racing, an old man, about 40, told me if a wheel comes off at 130, Don, you'll probably be killed. So I immediately made the full floater rear. One of the advantages of going to the full floater rear in the safety hubs was not only the fact that a wheel wouldn't come off, you threw away the spider gears and you had a homemade spool. That meant both wheels pulled exactly the same, and that's what allowed me to outrun Cook and Bedwell on that historic day at Cordova when they lined me up with him for the first round, thinking they were going to send Cook into the second round with an easy run. But 996 wasn't so easy to beat with a 10-0 by Mr. Cook. And so that was something that really gave me the incentive to come back to Florida and try to figure out the fuel system, which was what was the key to how to go fast. But the real secret to the speed was fuel delivery. This great big tank is just a thinner, 5-gallon thinner can is all it is, and the huge 1-inch lines supplied enough nitromethane to the fuel block that the carburetors didn't starve halfway down the course. When the Cook and Bedwell car would go down the course, about halfway down, it'd go, whoa, 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 and then it'd come back up as he pumped the fuel. This one didn't need that. It ran strong the entire length of the quarter, and hence the 176.4. Of course, it was just a matter of time till everybody got on that, and it wasn't long later we were all going 200. But this will be a very interesting car, and it is being recreated to run so that I can actually take it to the drag strip and make test runs.
Inside Drag Racing is being brought to you by ARP, the world leader in racing fastener technology. Precision Turbo, world's foremost manufacturer of high-performance aftermarket turbochargers. Aeromotive, we know it, we race it, we live it. And by Headman Headers, proud to say, made in the USA.
Welcome back to Inside Drag Racing. Well, we moved over to a thing that's called Don's Garage. Now, there are really 3 of those now. The new one is called the Annex to the museum. We'll show you that in a little bit. The old one is a Quonset hut sitting right over there. This is Big Daddy's personal garage where he likes to work on things, loves to turn wrenches, likes to work on cars, recreate and repair and restore the cars that go into the museum. Right here is an Arden Ford. Big Daddy will tell us about this engine a little bit later in the show. Right now, though, he's putting an Arden Ford in a roadster that he's building, not for the museum, but for him to cruise around in. Big Daddy loves cars.
You know, I've had a lot of projects around the museum. I've had a lot of parts that I've saved a long time, and I'm finally in my old age getting around to doing it. And thank God I'm healthy enough to feel like doing it. These Arden engines, I've had them for 40 years. This body, all steel, 27T Roadster, I've had that 30 years. We used 1932 frame rails, built all of the frame here, got a 39 Ford transmission in it with a Lincoln 25 tooth gears. You hot rodders don't know what we're talking about. And it drives into a Jimmy Franklin quick change rear end, one of the first 3 that he ever built in the early 50s. I had it for my flathead dragster, but decided not to put it in there because it might be a little dangerous. Another nice thing, it's got some stuff on here that they have today. This looks like the 1954 Buick brakes. They were very popular back in the day with the big fins, but this actually is not the Buick. That's hiding spot brakes, which really makes it nice. You know, I have a saying back here in Florida, all of my cars got to be 12 volts and spot brakes. I want them to start every time, and I want them to stop every time. This will be a fair weather car, no top, just going to be upholstered. It's not, that has to go to the trim shop yet. I'm just going to drive it in the nice weather and around to the cruise ins here in Ocala. But I'm going to take it to the Oakland Roadster Show in 2016. I've never been there with a car, and now I'll have the adequate car to go to Pomona. It's no longer in Oakland.
It's time for this week's ARP Quarter Mile Quiz. Bill from Tampa, Florida wants to know, how much fuel does a fuel pump pump? And we'll have the answer after the break. And with the answer to this week's ARP Quarter Mile Quiz is funny car driver Tommy Johnson Jr.
You know, at 8,000 RPMs, they'll pump around 107, 108 gallons a minute. We can't use all that, so we regulate it back. But it's controlled off the engine. It's driven off the camshaft. So depending on engine RPM is how much fuel it's pumping. In the middle of the course, we're running up around 82 to 85 gallons a minute through the quarter mile or through the lights. So we won't use all of it, but we use most of it.
Welcome back to Inside Drag Racing. No, this is not a drag race car. Remember, I showed you in the last segment we were in Don's garage. Well, I'm still in Don's garage, and not everything in here is going to be restored and go into the museum. This is a boat that Big Daddy won. It was a gift. He didn't even know he was going to get it. He won an event for Chrysler Corporation running the Hemi. Remember, he was one of the guys that originally got Chrysler involved in Top Fuel drag racing. He had won an event. They were so happy. They said, you know what, Big Daddy, here's a boat for you to go water skiing, you and Pat. Of course, it has a Volvo engine that says on it that it's Chrysler Marine, okay? He decided to drag this boat out of storage, out of the mothballs, and restore it. He did that. He's been taking it out to the lake and doing a little boating. He might not want me to tell you that because he likes everybody to believe he does nothing but drag race. Nah, Big Daddy likes to do other things too. Meanwhile, about that Arden engine, you saw that being installed in the Roadster over there, the Big Daddy's building for himself. Now in Don's garage, he's going to tell us a little bit more about the Arden engine.
We're standing in Don's garage. I'm the only guy that works in this building, and nobody comes over here unless I invite them. It's always locked when I'm gone, and you can see I've got several projects going on. This is an Arden. You see a 49 Mercury all taken apart here, getting ready to put that together. Not many people around that do flatheads anymore. I just do a few. This is a personal friend of mine, but I got all the equipment and the know-how. But this is one of my pets. There was 200 Ardens built by Arcus Duntov. That's what Arden stands for. Him and his brother built these things for trucks, and they were built because the flathead engine was inadequate when put into extreme service. Now, in your passenger car, your pickup truck in 1946, no problem. You put that same engine in a dump truck with a 16-yard box on the back of it, and you start across Jellicoe Mountain with a load of gravel, you got a problem. And that's what these heads were all about. They're aluminum hemispherical combustion chamber overhead valves, and they turned a 100-horse flathead into 175 horse. Now, this one is special. These engines controlled all of the drag racing records, all of the Bonneville records, and all of the Dry Lakes records until we got a handle on the overhead valve engines. This one will make about 500 horse on 98% nitro for a few seconds, and you would find this engine in a car like the Swamp Rat 1 that's sitting on the jig. It won't run very long, but it'll run strong. And the problem is the flathead's only got 3 mains, and so that's a weak point about that. And we probably, what happened back in the 1948 was Chrysler probably got their hands on a few sets of these things and saw how powerful they were and decided to build the 331 engine that they put in those 51 Chryslers that we all know became the standard of the industry.
All right, thank you, Big. In Don's garage, by the way, you'll find all sorts of engine memorabilia. Many of these motors are very significant. They came out of a certain car, a certain era. They'll eventually appear in the museum. Here's spare body parts, fenders and what have you, for cars that he's going to restore. And if you look back here, you'll see Shirley Muldowney's original tool chest for when she raced Top Fuel drag racing. That may eventually go over in the museum. Hanging up right there, Jim and Allison Lee's Great Expectations dragster. He's going to restore that. He just hung it up to get it out of the way for right now. This is a restoration mecca. This is some place that nobody gets to go except Big Daddy. And well, now you've got to visit there. We'll be back with more Inside Drag Racing after this.
Inside Drag Racing is being brought to you by ARP, the world leader in racing fastener technology. Race Gas, get more out of your engine. Custom Auto Sound, the originator of classic car OEM fit radio since 1977. And by Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping.
Back on Inside Drag Racing. Well, folks, we promised you we would introduce you to the annex. This is the annex to the museum. Nobody gets to see this except those people that take special tours in groups. They pay a slight additional fee, and they get a special tour with Big Daddy himself, including Big's garage and the annex. It has some very special cars. It also has these Ford Flathead. You see, besides being an expert on the Chrysler Hemi engine, Big Daddy also had a lot of experience and started drag racing with the Ford Flathead. That's why he likes the Arden engine that we told you about. Now, this engine right over here, this particular Ford Flathead, only makes 60 horsepower. This is a stock one, the way it was originally built. Big Daddy started it for us so we could just even hear the horsepower. By the way, this is a reproduction right here of the Navy-sponsored car. Big Daddy actually had a sponsorship from the U.S. Navy, took the car, put it on an aircraft carrier, made a poster. They were using it for recruiting. Never know what little gems you're going to find here at the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing. Now, in the main museum, you may notice a big portrait of the king of NASCAR racing, Richard Petty. Big and Richard really got to be good friends. He was very close to the Pettys. As a matter of fact, he has a car that was given to the museum in this museum. Let's find out about that with Big.
One of the very special cars in the Don Garlits Annex is this 32 Ford Roadster built by Lee Petty. That's the father of Richard Petty. And Lee Petty was very famous in that he won the Daytona 500 in 1954 with a Chrysler V8 coupe with a 331 cubic inch engine in it when the race was on the beach in A1A. This was before super speedways. Well, I had trouble with my 54 Chrysler with bearings, so what did I do? I just called up Lee Petty and asked him what to do, and he was so nice. He says, you got a pencil and paper? Write down these numbers. Told me everything I needed to know, and I became a Petty fan for life. Richard was just a little guy when this was going on. But then I later was called to the White House by Richard Nixon, and who was there but Richard Petty, and he asked us to go to Vietnam and entertain the troops. And he said, the reason I called you guys, because I know you ain't afraid of nothing. I want you to go to the front lines where the shooting's going on and cheer those boys up that never get to see any celebrities. So Richard and I went over. I spent 16 days with him. What a great guy. I became Petty fans for life. 3 months before Lee died, I just happened to be coming down I-77 and the sign said, level cross, next exit. I said to my wife, Pat, let's stop and see if the Pettys are home. Knock on the door. Lee Petty comes to the door. Hadn't seen me in over 10 years. Says, Don Garlits, what are you doing in level cross? I said, just passing through, Mr. Petty. He said, who you got with you? I said, my wife. He said, let's sip a glass of sweet tea and talk about racing. I was there 3.5 hours. Oh my God, he hated NASCAR. He said, those weren't Fords, Chevrolets, or Dodges. He says they were just some car that they built like a race car. He said, I liked it when I went round to the dealership and got my Chrysler right off the showroom floor, and the next day was racing it. I said, well, I said, you don't think John Force drives a Mustang, do you? Of course he doesn't. It's a plastic replica of something close. Anyway, his parting words was, he says, Don, I guess we just got too old for it, didn't we? I said, you know, Mr. Petty, you might be right. And I wouldn't take nothing for that 3.5 hour visit. What a grand old man that was. This is the last car that Lee Petty built. This is all old school, and he built it for his old friend, Fred Cox. And then Lee passed away, and then later Fred passed away. They were about the same age. And wouldn't you know, he left it in his will to Richard. And Richard had it in his museum for a short period of time, and he gets me on the phone. He says, you know, Don, he said, this is more you than it is me, and you were such good friends with my dad. Why don't you take it down to your museum? It'll serve a better purpose there with your fans than here with me. He said, I'm NASCAR to the bone. So here it is, and I have it on the tour. I tell the people about it, and I just enjoy it so much because it just takes me back, and I reminisce about all the wonderful people like Lee Petty that I knew when I was a kid and was getting started.
In the museum annex, you'll find a good array of Ford flathead engines. If you're a Flatheads Forever Ford flathead guy, you got to get into this annex and see all of these. In addition, there's a whole engine room over there in the museum. They got stock ones just the way they were released by the Ford Motor Company. Then they have some that have been kind of souped up. Here's one with Edelbrock heads. Not Vic Jr., Vic Sr. came up with these heads, 3 two-barrel carburetors, and so forth and so on. In addition to some of the gasoline-powered, nitromethane-powered cars that were in drag racing, Big Daddy also has a very unusual and very, very fast rocket car here in the museum annex.
Rocket Rod Phelps. I mean, now we're talking about one of the pure daredevils of drag racing. He built and drove this funny car 301 miles an hour. Now that doesn't sound like much, but it was in the 8th mile in 2.7 seconds from a dead stop. Now that's about 12 G's. He also built and drove the blue rocket dragster that's in my building, 352 miles an hour in 3.5 seconds from a dead stop, and that's a world record that's still not been broken. These cars were absolutely phenomenal. They were dangerous, but you know, these were the sons of danger that drove this kind of stuff. They loved it. That little round tank, 3,000 pounds of nitrogen. The big tank, 20 gallons of hydrogen peroxide. If you get it on your skin, it will eat you up. This is not the little 1% you see at the drugstore in the brown bottle. This is the real McCoy. If you walk in this stuff and it's puddled on the floor, you got leather-soled shoes, eats the leather soles right up. It's pushed across at 3,000 pounds a sterling silver screen, and it decomposes and expands 1,000 times. It will not shut off once you step on the throttle. The entire 20 gallons has to go out of the tank, and the way they regulate these things, they just put enough fuel in to go the quarter mile. Now, they did have some trouble at Charlotte Motor Speedway way back in the day when they ran an 8th mile and they were trying to figure out how much fuel to put in there. Put too much, car kept right on going, careened off into the pits, and some people were killed. All of this got the attention of NHRA, and eventually these cars were outlawed. I was very fortunate to get this one. It's a really nice car. I got it for $6,500. We're talking $150,000 worth of equipment. I can't run it, but you know I don't care about that. This is for the drag racing fans to see and hear the stories about these fabulous cars that were absolutely crowd pleasers. You'll never see one again because the hydrogen peroxide today is even outlawed to be in the hands of a civilian. Only the military can have it. So this is it. It's a thing that has long gone, but boy, were they something to see. Sammy Miller had one, he called it Vanishing Point because it just went shoo, and it was gone. And they are gone.
That'll be a wrap for this edition of Inside Drag Racing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ted Jones. Hope you enjoyed going behind the scenes here at the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing. Believe me, if you have never been here, you owe it to yourself to spend a day. Plan on spending the whole day to go through the museum. And don't forget to stop and pick up a souvenir in the souvenir store. So long, everyone.